What's good? What's good? I want to continue doing some reading from varieties of psychohistory. It pairs well with my last video discussing the institution versus the individual and how we need to rebuild both as we seek to engage in police and community reform. So I had started reading a section titled Violence Without Moral Restraint, Reflections on the Dehumanization of Victims and Victimizers. And so I left off here at the section, The Loss of Restraint. I would like to discuss 3 interrelated processes that lead to the weakening of moral restraints against violence. Authorization, routinization, and dehumanization. Through processes of authorization, the situation becomes so defined that the standard moral principles do not apply, and the individual is absolved of responsibility to make personal moral choices. Through processes of routinization, the action becomes so organized that there is no opportunity for the raising of moral questions and making of moral decisions. Through process of dehumanization, the actor's attitudes towards the target and toward himself become so structured that it is neither necessary nor possible for him to view the relationship in moral terms. Authorization. Sanctioned massacres, by definition, occur in the context of an authority situation. The structure of an authority situation is such that, at least for many of the participants, the moral principles that generally govern human relationships do not apply. Thus, when acts of violence are explicitly ordered, implicitly encouraged, tacitly approved, or at least permitted by legitimate authorities, people's readiness to commit or condone them is considerably enhanced. The fact that such acts are authorized seems to carry automatic justification for them. Behaviorally, authorization obviates the necessity of making judgments or choices. Not only do normal moral principles become inoperative, but particularly when the actions are explicitly ordered, a different kind of morality, linked to the duty to obey superior orders, tends to take over. An individual in an authority situation characteristically feels obligated to obey the orders of the authorities, whether or not these correspond with his personal preferences. He sees himself as having no choice as long as he accepts the legitimacy of the orders and of the authorities who give them. Individuals differ considerably in the degree to which and the conditions under which they are prepared to challenge the legitimacy of an order on the grounds that the order itself is illegal, or that those giving it have overstepped their authority, or that it stems from a policy that violates fundamental societal values. Regardless of such individual differences, however, the basic structure of a situation of legitimate authority requires the individual to respond in terms of authoritative demands rather than personal preferences. He can disobey only by challenging the legitimacy of the authority. Often, people obey without question, even though the behavior they engage in may entail great personal sacrifice or great harm to others. An important corollary of the basic structure of the authority situation is that the individual does not see himself as personally responsible for the consequences of his actions. Again, there are individual differences depending on one's capacity and readiness to evaluate the legitimacy of orders received. Insofar as the person sees himself, however, as having had no choice in the action, he does not feel personally responsible for it. He was not a personal agent, but merely an extension of the authority. Thus, when his action causes harm to others, he can feel relatively free of guilt. A similar mechanism operates when a person engages in antisocial behavior that was not ordered by the authorities, but tacitly encouraged and improved by them, even if only making it quite clear that such behavior will not be punished. In this situation, behavior that was formerly illegitimate is legitimized by the authorities' acquiescence. In the Life Massacre, it is likely that the structure of the authority situation contributed to the massive violence in the two ways just described. That is, by conveying both the message that acts of violence against Vietnamese villagers were required, and the message that such acts, even if not ordered, were permitted by the authorities in charge. The actions at My Lai represented, at least in some respects, responses to explicit or implicit orders. Everyone agrees that Lieutenant Cali, the officer in immediate charge of the operation, ordered his men to shoot all the inhabitants of the village. Whether Cali himself had been ordered by his superiors to waste the whole area, as he claimed, is a matter of controversy. Even if we assume, however, that he was not explicitly ordered to wipe out the village, he had reason to believe that such actions were expected by his superior officers. Indeed, the very nature of the war conveyed this expectation. The principal measure of military success was the body count, the number of enemy soldiers killed, and any Vietnamese killed by the U.S. military was commonly defined as a Viet Cong. Thus, it was not totally bizarre for Cali to believe that what he was doing at My Lai was to increase his body count, as any good officer was expected to do. Even to the extent that the actions at My Lai occurred spontaneously, without reference to superior orders, those committing them had ample reason to assume that such actions would not be punished and might even be tacitly approved by the military authorities. Actions similar to those at My Lai, though perhaps not on the same scale, were not uncommon in Vietnam, and the authorities had quite clearly shown a permissive attitude toward them. Not only had they failed to punish such acts in most cases, but the very strategies and tactics that they themselves consistently devised were based on the proposition that the civilian population of South Vietnam, regardless of whether it involved in hostile or friendly elements, was totally expendable. Such policies as search and destroy missions, the establishment of free shooting zones, the use of anti-personnel weapons, the bombing of entire villages, if they were suspected of harboring guerrillas, the forced migration of masses of the rural population, and the defoliation of vast forest areas helped to legitimize acts of massive violence of the kind that occurred at My Lai. The events at My Lai suggest an orientation to authority based on unquestioning obedience to superior orders, no matter how destructive the actions called for by these orders. Such obedience is specifically fostered in the course of military training and reinforced by the structure of the military authority situation. It also reflects, however, an ideological orientation that may be widespread in general populations. It seems that such an ideology, similar to, though obviously rooted in different historical experiences and probably differing in many nuances from that suggested for Nazi Germany, is accepted by large numbers of Americans. In a national survey of public reactions to the Cali trial, conducted a few weeks after the conviction of Lieutenant Cali had been announced, we asked respondents what they thought they would do if they were soldiers in Vietnam and were ordered by their superior officers to shoot all inhabitants of a village suspected of aiding the enemy, including old men, women, and children. 51% of our sample said that they would follow orders and shoot. 33% said that they would refuse to shoot. We cannot infer, of course, from their responses to a hypothetical question what these individuals would actually do if they found themselves in the situation described. Our data do suggest, however, that they are prepared, in principle, to engage in mass violence if faced with authoritative orders to do so. They are certainly prepared to condone such actions. They regard obedience to orders under these circumstances, even if that means shooting unarmed civilians, as the normatively expected, the required, indeed, the right and moral thing for the good citizen to do. In short, the cognitive and ideological grounding for mass violence in an authority situation seems to be present in large segments of the U.S. population, and very probably of other populations as well. See, for example, and then it's just a reference. Okay. From the pattern of their responses to a variety of questions, we can gain some understanding of the differences between those who say they would follow orders and shoot in the hypothetical situation, and those who say they would refuse to shoot. Those who say they would shoot seem to feel, by and large, that the individual has no choice in the face of authoritative orders. He has neither the responsibility nor the right to question such orders. They make a sharp separation between authority situations and interpersonal situations in daily life. The moral norms that apply in the latter are, in their view, irrelevant in the former. Within authority situations, they feel unable to differentiate between circumstances under which it would be right and those under which it would be wrong to obey superior orders. Those who say they would refuse to shoot would generally agree that the legitimate orders must be obeyed, but their view of the authority situation is more flexible. Obedience is less automatic. The individual has both the right and the duty to make certain judgments and choices. Thus, they are prepared to make certain moral distinctions, even in an authority situation. They are more inclined to see that situation as continuous with normal interpersonal relationships. Respondents who say they would follow orders and shoot, seeing themselves as totally devoid of choices in the face of authority, feel strongly that the individual cannot be held personally responsible for actions that he takes under these conditions. They seem to conceive the relationship between citizens and authorities as governed by an implicit contract. According to this contract, the citizen, at least in such areas as foreign and military policy, obeys without question. In return, the authorities accept full responsibility for the consequences of his actions. This view is consistent with a pattern of involvement in the political system that I have described elsewhere as normative integration, i.e., integration based primarily on adherence to system rules. Normatively integrated individuals do feel included in the system, but their inclusion is tenuous. They do not see themselves as owners of the system and independent agents with regard to national policy, but rather as pawns who are obligated to support these policies regardless of their personal preferences. Okay, my back's killing me. I need to figure out a better, ergonomic situation for reading and doing this, because, But anyways, thank you for listening. Psychohistory. Check it out.